Did you see something?
Yeah, we do. Are we currently
I'm on the XCOM, so I would say
Test. 1, 2, 3, 4. Test, test, 1, 2, 3, 4, test. Test, test, 1, 2, 3, 4, testing. 1, 2. Test, test, 1, 2, 3, 4, testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Test, test, 1, 2. Test, test.
to NTIA's seventh annual Spectrum Symposium. We have an extraordinary lineup of speakers and panelists with us here today, in a great position to discuss the opportunities that policymakers and regulators have to create for the best possible spectrum environment for our American world-leading companies to succeed. So, as running the Office of Spectrum Management at NTIA, I'm well aware of the possibilities and the challenges ahead as we implement the spectrum provisions of the One Beautiful Bill Act, or OB3 as we know it. We have our work cut out for us as we conduct the band studies that, together with the FCC action, will make 800 megahertz of new spectrum available for commercial use. Our keynote speaker today, NTIA Administrator Ariel Roth, will pilot us through the implementation period. She is ideally suited to be our leader at this juncture, as she was instrumental in shepherding the OB3 spectrum provisions as they move through Congress. On the Hill, Ariel served as a policy director for telecommunications at the Senate Committee of Commerce, Science, and Transportation under Senator Cruz. Previously, she was the counsel to former Senator Blunt. At the FCC, Ariel served as a wireline legal advisor to former Commissioner Mike O'Reilly and as legal advisor to the chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Assistant Secretary Ariel Roth.
Good morning and welcome to NTIA's Spectrum Policy Symposium. It's the honor of a lifetime to serve as the NTIA administrator at such a critical moment for the agency. With nearly 2 months under my belt, I'm thrilled to stand before you and share my vision on how NTIA, together with our federal and industry partners, can advance American-led spectrum innovation for the next decade and beyond. Let me begin by thanking our distinguished speakers, as well as those who've joined us in this lovely room in the Ronald Reagan building. President Reagan once joked, "The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are 'I'm from the government' and 'I'm here to help.'" Let's be honest, when it comes to spectrum policy, history has often proven him right. From the decades-long delay of FM radio in the 1940s to foot-dragging on cellular licensing in the 80s, rigid government gatekeeping too often sidelined America's innovators and left valuable spectrum underutilized. That began to change in the 90s with the introduction of flexible use licensing and spectrum auctions, reforms that finally removed the shackles and allowed spectrum to reach its highest and best use as a catalyst for investment and innovation. Now, with the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill, which not only restores spectrum auction authority, but mandates the largest spectrum pipeline in American history, we can build on that greatness and maximize the incredible potential of this resource. And what a resource it is. Thanks to American ingenuity, these invisible airwaves help keep our country safe, connect our first responders in moments of crisis, guide our planes in the sky, and enable everything from GPS navigation to the smartphones in our pockets. Spectrum brought radio and television into our homes, and now it powers the technologies that define modern life. Of course, with a resource this valuable, it can be hard to balance the many competing needs of spectrum users, both public and private, federal and non-federal. But I'm a mom of 6 kids, and balancing competing needs comes with the territory. Just like assigning seats in my minivan, spectrum allocation demands careful negotiation, ensuring everyone has a place, no one gets left out, and the ride still runs smoothly. And let me tell you, the fight over the second row window seat in my minivan, just as intense and sometimes just as loud as the fiercest battles over spectrum. I plan to bring that balancing mindset to spectrum policy, making sure every voice is heard, every need is considered, and ultimately that we arrive at solutions that work for everyone. But with spectrum and my minivan alike, you can't let the debate drag on forever because that undercuts the very purpose of getting in the car. At some point, you need to pick the assignments and drive. Speaking of driving forward, let's talk about 6G. As I touched on before, history shows what's possible when America gets spectrum policy right. 4G unlocked killer apps like ride-sharing, streaming, and video-based social networks. 5G is already closing broadband gaps with private networks and fixed wireless service. As we stand on the cusp of 6G and further integration of networks, we don't know yet what its killer app will be. But we do know this. As a matter of both our economic and national security, it must be developed here in America and by American innovators. That was the message Secretary Lutnick drove home last week when he spoke at our NTIA town hall. The U.S. must lead in 6G. To ensure that happens, we need clear and decisive action to get more spectrum into the marketplace as soon as possible. For the past few years, America's spectrum pipeline has been defined by lots of talk and no action. Those days are over. President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill restored the FCC's auction authority and directed regulators to find 800 megahertz of prime spectrum to auction for commercial use. I'm proud to have helped draft the spectrum provisions of that bill while serving as a staffer on the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. But let's be clear, those provisions only became law because of the leadership of President Trump, my current boss, Secretary Lutnick, and my former boss, Senator Ted Cruz. They fought for the American consumer and struck a deal that strengthened both our national security and economic future. Now the work shifts to us. We have a mission to build one big, beautiful spectrum pipeline that will deliver faster wireless networks, fuel innovation, and secure America's position as the world's technological powerhouse. The OB3 directs NTIA to identify 500 megahertz of federal spectrum to be auctioned and reallocated for full power commercial license use. The FCC is required to auction an additional 300 megahertz of spectrum, including at least 100 megahertz in the upper C-band. The law sets out a few milestones for NTIA, identifying at least 200 megahertz within 2 years and the remaining 300 megahertz within 4 years. NTIA and the rest of the administration have hit the ground running, thanks in large part to a 10-week spectrum sprint to identify potential bands even prior to the enactment of OB3. We're building on that framework to ensure that we can meet the deadlines Congress set and, if possible, beat them. In fact, the countdown to 500 starts today. I'm proud to announce that I'll be sending a letter to Chairman Carr informing him that NTIA has already identified the first 5 megahertz of federal spectrum for the FCC to auction and will be studying the 15 megahertz immediately adjacent to it. That spectrum will come from 1675 megahertz, part of what's known as the L-band, and its reallocation will result in a win-win for incumbent user NOAA and the American public. To identify the remainder, NTIA plans to assess 4 targeted spectrum bands in the range set by Congress: 7125 to 7400, 1680 to 1695, 2700 to 2900, and 4400 to 4940 megahertz. Combined with their sweet spot propagation characteristics, these bands offer opportunities for larger channeled bandwidths needed for 5G and future 6G networks, and have the potential to generate substantial auction revenues for the U.S. government while modernizing federal operations. We expect to make progress on all 4 of these bands within a year and plan to exceed our target of identifying 200 megahertz under this administration. Indeed, we're already well on our way to identifying spectrum in the 7 gigahertz band, having already secured funding from the Spectrum Relocation Fund. Meanwhile, NTIA will actively support and contribute to the FCC's efforts to auction the upper C-band so we can maximize the amount of commercial spectrum we can clear while enabling a one-time next-generation retrofit of aircraft altimeters. If done right, this effort won't just increase the value and utility of the C-band in the United States, but it will also pave the way for harmonized clearing across the globe. In other words, America's gift to the world. As we look to the future of connectivity, it's also clear that satellite services are playing an increasingly vital role, especially as we enter the new era of 6G. One of the most exciting developments is the rapid progress in direct-to-device satellite technology. These advances are already connecting more Americans and enabling seamless integrated networks that reach even the most remote areas. Customers don't care whether their connection comes from terrestrial or satellite networks. They just want their technology to work, whether it's to the handset or to the home. That's why convergence, the merging of networks, is such a powerful and promising part of the 6G vision. To support this evolution, we must ensure that sufficient spectrum is available. Satellite applications are growing faster than regulators anticipated, and we must be proactive in meeting that demand. At NTIA, we are committed to expanding commercial access to satellite spectrum while also balancing the needs of our federal users. And just as importantly, we must continue to embrace the guiding principle of technology neutrality across all our programs, an approach that has consistently proven to be the most effective way to foster broadband innovation and competition. Whether it's terrestrial or satellite, fiber or wireless, what matters most is delivering effective connectivity to the American public, not one-size-fits-all government mandates that don't reflect the realities on the ground. On the topic of on-the-ground realities, let's also not forget what powers our networks today. While licensed spectrum is critical, the majority of mobile traffic is actually offloaded onto Wi-Fi. Born in America, led by America, Wi-Fi remains an area where we dominate, and we must continue to invest in this important technology. With Wi-Fi, the race has already been won. China knows it can't compete, and for that reason, looks for ways to sabotage the very ingenuity that made Wi-Fi a global standard. As NTIA looks to identify spectrum in the federal bands mentioned above, we encourage the FCC to consider opportunities to grow these technologies and other innovative forms of spectrum sharing as well. But our leadership can't stop at our borders. The 2027 World Radio Communication Conference is just around the corner, and it will be pivotal. We must go in united, confident, and ready to lead, not just reacting to others, but shaping the agenda. We're working closely with the White House, the State Department, the FCC, and others to develop positions that will allow the United States to go into WRC as the world's most dynamic and authoritative leader in spectrum management. That means learning from the lessons of WRC 23 and going in with strong established U.S. positions, including back on Chinese attempts to redefine the 6 gigahertz band and instead advancing what we believe is the best path forward for 6G. The bottom line is this: America has a big task ahead of us, and we're going to get it done. For decades, the world has looked to us to lead in spectrum management and innovation. We now have the tools and resolve to set the next wireless standard for years to come. Our efforts won't be a rote response to a congressional mandate. Spectrum leadership is essential to both our national security and our economic prosperity. We will treat this challenge with the urgency it demands, and we are up for the challenge. And for me, this mission is personal. As a mother, I think often about the future we're building. Spectrum policy may sound technical, but at its heart, it's about ensuring that the next generation of Americans, including my own children, inherits a country defined by prosperity, security, and opportunity. And speaking of commitment to America's future, we would not be here today without the vision, drive, and fearlessness of my former boss, Chairman Cruz. In recognition of his leadership, we'd like to present Senator Cruz with our newly updated spectrum allocation chart, the first comprehensive update in nearly a decade. This chart is both a visual tool to help Americans understand how we're using spectrum and a snapshot of the incredible complexity of managing this vital resource. But it's just a snapshot because as we work to implement Chairman Cruz's vision, we'll be making this chart obsolete, and we can't wait to do so. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming the chairman of the Commerce Committee and the senator from the great state of Texas, Ted Cruz.
Well, thank you. That chart is spectacular. And let me say I'm really proud to be here. I am proud to be here, and I want to congratulate NTIA's new administrator, my former staffer who did heroic work on telecom policy, and Ariel, or shall I say Administrator Roth. Congratulations, you're doing an amazing job, and my only comment is work harder. Because we got a lot of work to do. I will say, if you look at spectrum and how this got done in the One Big Beautiful Bill, I will tell you 6 months ago, there was virtually nobody in this town who thought we could get this done. As we were starting to talk about reconciliation and what we were going to do, I was pressing, we are going to have a spectrum pipeline in the bill. I'll tell you, I sat in the Speaker's office. Mike Johnson is a good friend of mine. I sat in the Speaker's office. I said, we're going to do spectrum. The Speaker literally laughed out loud at me. He laughed. He said, Ted, there is no way on earth our defense hawks are going to sign off on spectrum. Give it up. It ain't going to happen. Well, it did happen. And I will tell you, we had about 1,000 battles to get it done. Obviously, in the previous administration, auction authority had expired, and it lay dormant. I will tell you at the end, when we're going back and forth, and as everyone here knows, DOD and the intelligence community fights ferociously to protect their spectrum. They don't like giving up any of it. At the very end, you know, Otto von Bismarck famously said there are two things you never want to see being made: sausage and legislation. There's a lot of truth to that. Both involve a lot of pig guts. But I will tell you, so my view consistently was there should be no exclusions whatsoever. None. That was not the view of some of my colleagues. And so at the very end of it, the final negotiation happened actually on the floor of the Senate, but it was not on the microphones, it was not on C-SPAN, but it was standing in the back of the floor of the Senate, and I was there with Roger Wicker and Tom Cotton, and Mike Rounds and Deb Fisher. And we were negotiating it, and they really wanted an exception. They wanted multiple exceptions, and I didn't want to give any. And then at the end of the day, to get it done, I said, fine, we'll do carve-outs, but I have a principle in negotiation, which is if you're giving something up, always get something in response to it. So as y'all know, for years, my spectrum pipeline bill had 600 megahertz in it, and with no exclusions whatsoever. When I finally gave in on exclusions, I said, we're going to do that, but we're not going to do it for nothing. So if we're going to have some exclusions, instead of 600 megahertz, it needs to be 800 megahertz. Now, this is a very technical and sophisticated audience. So I'd like to say that was the process of careful analysis of the spectrum that was available. It wasn't at all. I'm going to give a highly technical answer of where 800 megahertz came from, which is I pulled it out of my ass. It was, for any movie fans, if any of you remember the movie Spinal Tap, the approach was essentially ours goes to 11. On the amplifier, it doesn't end at 10. We made it 11 because 11 is bigger. And so the great, Ariel laughed at me when I said, I'm going to ask for 800. She's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, well, 800 is bigger than 600, right? She said, yeah. So that's good staffing, by the way. The next day, I'm at home early in the morning, my cell phone rings, and it's the president. And he's sitting there with Howard Lutnick and Scott Bessent in the Oval. And Trump goes, Ted, how did you get this incredible deal? This deal is unbelievable. I can't believe this deal. And I gave what is the only correct answer to that response. I said, well, Mr. President, it's entirely because of you. That is what I said. But it so happened that it was true, because the president had put out a tweet, and I will tell you, this was a tweet that was negotiated for 4 months in close knife combat in the White House. But he put out a tweet saying we need to have a pipeline in the bill. It needs to have 600 megahertz, because that's what we were going for at the time. And it needs to have no exclusion. So when I was standing on the back of the floor, I had printed out the damn tweet. And as my colleagues are saying, we need all these exclusions, I said, look, that's very interesting. The President of the United States disagrees with you. And without that tweet, we don't get the deal done. But it ended up being a very effective cudgel. And now, RL, you and your team have to figure out where the hell to find 800 megahertz. The reason for this pipeline is America needs to win. We need to beat China. Look, China is engaged in a global race with the United States. I'll tell you, when I arrived in the Senate 13 years ago, I said at the time that China is the single greatest geopolitical threat facing the United States for the next 100 years. And I got to tell you, 13 years ago, that was a rare voice. It was a lonely voice in the Senate. Every Democrat disagreed with me, and most of the Republicans disagreed with me. At the time, they looked at China and they saw nothing but dollar signs as far as the eyes can see. I will say, post-COVID, a lot of people's assessments of China have changed. And I think China is engaged in an economic and diplomatic war with the United States for global dominance. They are engaged in a 1,000-year war. And the United States far too often takes time to come awake and be aware of the threats we face. My chairmanship of the Commerce Committee is focused across the board on beating China. Today we've got a hearing on AI. We've got to beat China in the race to AI. The pipeline was about beating China in the race to 6G. Also included in the One Big Beautiful Bill was $24 billion for the Coast Guard, the largest investment in the history of the Coast Guard. A huge part of that is polar ice cutters, because in the Arctic, China is kicking our ass right now. Another part of the One Big Beautiful Bill was $9.5 billion for space, and in particular going back to the moon, because China has declared its objective to go to the moon by 2030, and I will tell you, if we wake up and turn on the television and see Chinese astronauts on the surface of the moon, and they beat us to the moon, and even worse, they have staked out the high ground in terms of the moon, the blow to the United States would make Sputnik seem mild. We are not going to lose the moon to the Chinese. So across the board, that is a unifying theme. We will beat China and prevail. Now, as everyone here knows, as part of the 800 megahertz pipeline, which was the result of careful systematic study, no one. The NTIA is required to identify 500 megahertz of government spectrum for future commercial use. The government has to work hand in hand with America's private innovators. Within a 10-year span, I predict the spectrum pipeline, and particularly the transition of 500 megahertz of spectrum from government to commercial use, will open the door to technologies that seem like science fiction today. In addition to the 500 megahertz of government spectrum, the pipeline requires that an additional 300 megahertz of other spectrum be identified and auctioned for commercial use. The FCC, with its Spectrum Auction Authority now finally restored, has already begun the process to auction at least 100 megahertz in the upper C-band, with Chairman Carr already engaging with stakeholders in the band, laying the groundwork for communication and coordination required for quick, successful action. We all remember the lower C-band auction from a few years ago that raised over $80 billion for the taxpayers. And I'm looking forward to seeing the kinds of records set by this next auction. The FCC will auction at least another 200 megahertz in due course. Zooming back out, I want to reiterate what a tremendous achievement for the country this pipeline is. Dedicating 800 megahertz for commercial use will raise billions of dollars for the taxpayers. It will stimulate billions more in private sector investment. It will create tens of thousands of high-paying jobs, and it will lay the foundation for countless technological innovations. These benefits will be felt nationwide and indeed worldwide across multiple generations of Americans. The pipeline will also be a big boost to America's national security. Beating China in 5G and 6G is critical. Downstream of this are critical adjacent industries like artificial intelligence, quantum, semiconductors. The Spectrum pipeline, the largest in American history, ensures that America does not go down a dark path. Finally, I want to talk about the work that still needs to be done to implement the law, particularly in defending and preserving what was a hard-won deal. The final language in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was the product of tough negotiations that took place over the course of many months. While no one got everything they wanted, we came to a fair agreement that promotes wireless innovation while simultaneously protecting national security. To that end, President Trump signed the pipeline into law on Independence Day. Unfortunately, though, not even 3 months later, we're seeing the usual suspects trying to undermine the deal. As you know, every year, Congress takes up the National Defense Authorization Act, otherwise known as the NTIA. Each year, this must-pass legislation is a prime target for legislative shenanigans, and this year has been no different. Tucked into the Senate's NDAA is Section 1564, which gives the Joint Chiefs a veto over any modification to the lower 3 gigahertz and the 7 to 8 gigahertz bands. To be clear, this is not consultation or collaboration on spectrum management, which, as we saw on the lower 3, previously had its own set of very substantial and real problems. No, this is a veto. If this becomes law, it would be a further upending of the nation's spectrum policy, jettisoning Senate-confirmed civilian management in favor of marching orders from the defense industrial complex. What's more, the language in Section 1564 doesn't just give the Joint Chiefs a veto over defense-related items. It gives them a veto over any modification in these bands. Practically speaking, this means NTIA would not even be able to move other federal operators to these bands, which it will have to do to clear spectrum for the pipeline, unless first receiving the approval of the sovereigns at the Joint Chiefs. And for what? This spectrum, the lower 3 and the 7 to 8 gigahertz bands, was already carved out for DoD in the pipeline bill. The FCC can't touch it. As you know, I'm not a fan of carve-outs. I didn't want any. But give and take, that's how deals are done. And at the time, DoD interests declared that the pipeline protected radar, protected other defense systems. But as so often the case, unfortunately, the usual suspects want yet another bite at the apple. Not only is this bad policy, it is bad faith. In negotiations over Spectrum Pipeline, we never agreed to give DoD veto power over spectrum auctions or to sideline NTIA as the Federal Spectrum Management Authority, nor would we. And fortunately, yet again, the White House and President Trump agree. Yesterday, on September 9th, the White House released a statement of administration policy unequivocally opposing Section 1564. So I call on my Senate colleagues, do not oppose President Trump on this. There's still work to do to remove this language from the bill. But the deal we cut on the One Big Beautiful Bill was a good deal. It was a good deal protecting our national security, and it was a good deal giving us the tools to ensure we prevail over China in the race for 6G. I want to thank everyone in this room for the hard work you do. It is important. And I'm proud to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cruz, and we'll be getting that chart to you a little bit later on. And Thank you, sir. But again, thank you for the Senator and Assistant Secretary Roth for providing a lot of information, not only on the NTIA strategy for undertaking the ban studies to implement the Big Beautiful Bill, but also providing some guidance as well about other spectrum bands and other services such as Wi-Fi and satellite. And also for Senator Cruz for giving us some kind of inside the Beltway activities on what transpired there. Always fascinating to hear. We're now ready to go to the next part of our agenda this morning. We have a fireside chat between two folks really in the thick of the decision making as we move rapidly in this new era. FCC Commissioner Olivia Trusty and our own NTIA Chief of Staff, Brooke Donnellan. As with our own Secretary Roth, Commissioner Trusty has a legislative background, having served on the staff of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and before that, on the House committee staff. She brings to this discussion a broad and unusual background, including the perspectives from both the federal and non-federal points of view. So Brooke came to us from her position at VP of Government Relations at NCTA. Thank you, the Internet and Television Association. She also served as a Chief of Staff to Commissioner Mike O'Reilly at the Commission and Deputy Chief of Staff to Senator Ron Johnson, and also Chief Counsel to the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. So these folks know how to get things done. So I'll turn it over to Brooke to get this fireside chat underway. Come on up.
All right, can you hear me? We all mic'd up? Great.
How about myself? Okay, yeah, I hear it.
Okay, well, Olivia, thank you for coming. I was going to introduce you as the more successful Tar Heel of the two of us, but since you're wearing Duke blue, I don't know if I can.
Oh, it's so painful to me. That's very embarrassing. I'm horrified, and I will burn this jacket after today.
Immediately. Well, let's just jump right in. I think the most popular topic at the FCC is C-band, so we have to start with that. What are your thoughts? What news can you break on C-band today?
None. But let me just first start out by saying thank you for the invitation to be here. It is an honor to be a part of today's NTIA Spectrum Policy Symposium, so thank you very much. With the One Big Beautiful Bill, I think it's important first to commend President Trump and Congress for getting this legislation across the finish line. And a special thanks goes to Chairman Cruz and Chairman Guthrie, as well as their staff, for their leadership efforts in making sure the legislation included a restoration of the FCC's general auction authority and a long-term spectrum pipeline. I think those provisions are critical to our economic and national security and position the United States to lead when it comes to next-generation communications technologies. So kudos to them. Now, as you mentioned, the FCC has been directed to make at least 100 megahertz of spectrum available or auction off at least 100 megahertz of upper C-band spectrum before 2 years, within 2 years of the date of enactment of the act. And before I was confirmed and sworn in at the commission, the FCC voted on a notice of inquiry on the upper C-band, and comments to that proceeding will inform the eventual notice of proposed rulemaking. In the meantime, my job is to continue working with the wireless community, with incumbent operators, as well as users of C-band services and federal partners like NTIA to further inform the rulemaking process. I also think we can look at lessons learned from the previous C-band auction in terms of just additional context and how to face the upper C-band. Now, you had mentioned how will the auction be received, and I think there's going to be tremendous interest in the upper C-band given existing commercial use on the band and the physical properties and characteristics of the spectrum. But what's top of mind for me is that the clock is ticking. Time is of the essence, and 2027 will be here before we know it. And so I know that the Wireless Bureau at the FCC, as well as the chairman's staff, are working very hard to make sure we meet that deadline as required in the bill, and I'm confident that we'll be able to do that.
Great. Well, turning to emerging technologies, Chairman Carr is very interested in the FCC leading and setting the stage for 6G and artificial intelligence. What do you think the FCC and NTIA can do together to spur American innovation?
Sure. So at the Commission, we have the Build America agenda, and that is all about promoting growth and unleashing innovation along the lines that you talked about. And so there are a number of things that we are doing to advance that agenda that I think NTIA can do as well. First, we're focused on embracing new technologies and not picking winners and losers in the marketplace. It's important that we assess technology based on the merit and ability to provide service to the American people. I think this will help accelerate the delivery of connectivity services to unserved and underserved communities across the country and expand the nation's innovation capacity by having more people connected. A second thing that we're focused on is removing regulatory barriers that impede the deployment of advanced networks. And so along those lines, we're focused on the pole attachment process, making that faster, more transparent, and cost-effective. We're also looking at making the environmental and historical review processes required under the National Environmental Protection Act and the National Historic Preservation Act more predictable and efficient for providers. And then there are rulemaking proceedings underway to advance copper retirement, to free up resources for modern infrastructure. Underpinning all of that is the Delete, Delete, Delete initiative, and that is all about removing outdated regulatory barriers that stifle innovation. And so expect more work on that front. The third thing is spectrum, making more spectrum available for commercial use. And as you know, the FCC and NTIA have had a long history working together to put spectrum to its highest and best use. And so I expect that work to continue, especially with the One Big Beautiful Bill. And then the fourth thing I'll mention is I think it's critically important that the FCC, NTIA, and the State Department work together in the lead up to the next World Radio Communications Conference. This is the forum where the future of international spectrum policy is decided, and it's critical that we are all on the same page going into that conference so that we can shape spectrum policy as well as global standards so that the United States is best positioned to capture first mover advantages in next generation communications technologies. So I said a lot there, and there are probably myriad other things that we could be focused on, but those four things are top of mind for me.
Yeah, just a small agenda.
I know, right?
At the FCC. Well, here's a question I've never asked you before in my entire life.
Okay.
Balancing spectrum policy. How do you balance unlicensed, licensed, now satellite spectrum when you're looking at allocating spectrum for commercial use?
Sure. Well, fortunately, the Commission is taking an all-of-the-above approach to spectrum policy, where we're looking to accommodate a variety of users and use cases, as well as technologies. And so with licensed spectrum, the One Big Beautiful Bill has clearly put a priority on making more licensed spectrum available. And so I think that will go a long way in supporting high data throughput technologies like artificial intelligence and helping us to recapture the lead when it comes to the next generation of wireless services. With respect to unlicensed spectrum, it continues to play an important role in connecting Americans across the country and fueling new and innovative technologies like Wi-Fi 7 and Wi-Fi 8, as well as the Internet of Things and autonomous systems. When it comes to satellite uses, there is a proceeding underway at the FCC, the Satellite Spectrum Abundance Proceeding, where we are looking to make spectrum available for satellite uses. And so, you know, an all-of-the-above approach, I think, is the best way to advance the public interest when we're thinking about spectrum policy.
And I think they told me you had 20,000 megahertz of satellite spectrum that you're
That's right.
considering.
Yeah, I can't quite conceptualize how much that is.
A lot of hertz.
Yeah.
How does, beyond just allocating spectrum for satellite, obviously we had some news this week, what can the U.S. do to make sure that we lead the race on space?
Sure. So, you know, there are a number of things that we're thinking about, spectrum and licensing. So when it comes to licensing, the FCC recently adopted a report and order to streamline the Earth Station licensing approval process, and that should reduce the burden when it comes to modification and renewals of Earth Station licensing. You mentioned spectrum, and we're looking at upwards of 20,000 megahertz. We're also looking at outdated rules to see if there's anything we can do to not have those types of things constrain the provision of satellite services going forward. some of these rules were developed in the 1990s, and so it's worth taking a look to see if they can be modernized or updated to facilitate more spectrum efficiency and use and sharing. So I would say licensing, spectrum, and looking to update outdated rules to propel the United States to have superiority in this very critical domain.
Great. And speaking of efficiency,
Yeah.
you know, we hear a lot at NTIA that government's not using their spectrum efficiently, that there's underutilized federal spectrum, but there's also a concern about underutilized commercial spectrum. So what is the FCC doing on that front to make sure that we are using spectrum to its highest and best use on both accounts?
Sure. So, you know, I think it's incumbent upon the FCC to make sure we're taking a close look at various bands to ensure that spectrum is being put to its highest and best use. With the One Big Beautiful Bill, there's clearly been a spotlight placed on mid-band spectrum, and so I anticipate having a lot of robust conversations with industry, with mid-band spectrum users, and with my colleagues about how to ensure we are maximizing this technology for the purposes that we need for economics, for national security, and for our strategic interests. One of the important guiding principles that I see with implementing the One Big Beautiful Bill, for instance, is advancing and protecting our national security. And I don't just mean protecting the bands that were excluded from auction. President Trump has said that our economic security is our national security. And so to me, that means, are we making spectrum available for 5G and 6G and wireless tech and next generation wireless services so that the United States is leading? I mentioned the WRC. Do we have a united position going into that so that we can work with our international allies in advance and preempt those who are seeking to undermine US interests? I think a lot about making spectrum available for the infrastructure stack that underpins artificial intelligence so that the United States is dominating in that technology. And then we just talked about space, having spectrum to support a variety of commercial applications, military applications, so that the United States' superiority is being advanced in this very, very critical domain. So I think all of those considerations will factor into the FCC's spectrum policy as we're seeking to put it to its highest and best use.
Well, we completely agree on WRC, and I know
Great.
NTIA looks forward to working with the FCC and State Department to establish strong positions going in.
Terrific.
Another front on national security, we hear about backup, GPS, space PNT, UAS. What are you guys looking at on that front?
Sure. So with GPS, also critical to our economic and national security, but we know it is vulnerable to disruption and manipulation via jamming and spoofing. And so before I was sworn in at the FCC, the Commission voted on a GPS NOI to explore complements and alternatives to GPS and seek comment on developing position navigation and timing technologies in the marketplace. And so comments to that will inform what our next steps should look like, whether there need to be rule changes, whether we should create innovation zones or test beds or have public-private partnerships to further develop this kind of redundancy in our GPS systems. One thing I think about when it comes to resilient critical communications infrastructure is earlier this year, the Chairman Carr, created a National Security Council within the FCC, and I think that's a great platform to leverage our authorities in the Secure and Trusted Communications Networks Act, so to ban equipment from vendors that pose a national security risk to our communications networks. It's also a platform to advance supply chain integrity. So in May, the FCC voted on the Bad Labs proceeding, where entities who have ties to our global adversaries shouldn't take part in our equipment authorization process, and we're already seeing activity on that front in light of the May vote. And then I think it's a way to coordinate with federal partners who have primary jurisdiction in the area of national security and intelligence. One issue when it comes to our national security that is not directly under the FCC's purview, but directly impacts our work is copper theft or infrastructure vandalism. In addition to creating broadband outages, it disrupts our emergency communications, which could have significant public safety and national security implications. And so I look forward to working with Congress, with states, and law enforcement agencies so that we can bring more visibility to this issue and hold bad actors accountable. I'll say one more thing and then I'll stop talking. I recently did an event in coordination with the Department of War Future G Office. And it was about integrated sensing and communications, which in a nutshell is a technological evolution in spectrum use. And it has myriad applications for the military, for public safety, for commerce, and smart infrastructure. I think for the United States to lead on things like this, we need continued collaboration between the private and public sector. I think we need to lead in global standard setting bodies. And I think we need a domestic regulatory framework that invites this kind of sustained innovation and investment from the defense community, from the wireless community, and everybody else. And so those are the things I think that are captured really under the FCC's Build America agenda, and I look forward to working on that in the coming months.
Well, thank you, Olivia. I really appreciate it. It's such an honor to get to chat with you. It's just like us chatting in Chef, only with people watching.
Yes.
So again, just really appreciate it. Congrats on being a commissioner. We are thrilled that you're over there and can't wait to work together.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Olivia and Brooke. We're going to have a break now. We're going to have about 10 minutes or so as we get ready for our panel discussions that will be occurring. The first panel will be an industry panel, followed by a government panel. So please stay for that, but we're going to take about a 10-minute break now. Thank you. So we're getting close for the break to be over, so if you could bring it back in here, please, find a seat. We'll get started with the next panel. So if you can come back in and make your seat. Appreciate all the great conversations, but we got to get going here with the next panel. All right. Well, we just had an outstanding first part of the symposium with Assistant Secretary Ariel Roth and Senator Cruz, along with the fireside chat with FCC Commissioner Olivia Trusty and our NTIA Chief of Staff, Brooke Donnellan. So just a taste of more of what's to come. So the second half, we're going to have a couple panels. The first panel will be an industry panel. Then immediately we're going to move into the second panel, being the government panel. So let's get started here with introducing the first of the two panel discussions. It will be monitored by Derek Copeland, one of my deputies from the Office of Spectrum Management. Derek has pulled together representatives from key stakeholder industries to discuss spectrum access requirements looking forward and how we can support those and also meet those for the government. So if we can ask our panelists to come up here and sit at the dais, please. And we'll have Derek come up to the podium. Thank you very much.
All right, we look all set. Good morning, everyone, and thank you again for joining us here at the NTIA Spectrum Symposium. This panel here I'm very excited about, titled New Spectrum Allocations and Policies for U.S. Leadership in 5G, 6G, and Other Emerging Technologies. And we've heard a lot about those already today. And with the ongoing rollout and evolution of 5G and early development of 6G, next generation Wi-Fi taking hold, rapid innovation in space-based communications, the U.S. private sector is in a race to deploy and maintain the world's leading, always available communications infrastructure. And this communications infrastructure is desperately needed to support the growth in applications ranging from AI and machine learning to smart agriculture to aviation to aeronautical uses at many different altitudes. This panel looks to explore how our world-leading industries can best incorporate current and future spectrum the United States government intends to make available over the next several years. From priorities as we implement the spectrum provisions of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, to other mechanisms to unleash spectrum-based innovation, what tools are at our disposal? Again, I'm really excited for us to explore what it will take to make America's wireless industries broadly defined catalysts for high-tech economic growth and innovation in the next decade and beyond. I'm joined by an esteemed panel of industry experts representing a broad range of interest in the effective use of the radio spectrum. So I will introduce them. I will note that their bios are in the handout, so I will dispense of reading through those. First panelist here is Jamison Dempsey. Jamison is Director of Satellite Policy at Space Explorations Technology Corp., better known as SpaceX, of course. Umair Javed. Umair is the Senior Vice President and General Counsel at CTIA. Chris Szymanski is Director of Product Marketing and Technology Strategy at Broadcom. And finally, Dave Wright is the Policy Director for Spectrum for the Future. In the interest of time, I'm going to dispose of opening remarks and dive into some questions, although the first one is a bit of a scene setter. I'll also note that time permitting, we will take audience questions. There will be a roving mic at the end if we have that opportunity. So going to jump right in here, and I think we could just go right down the line for starters. First question really is around these future data drivers. So regulators and policymakers are always trying to anticipate and accommodate future innovation as best as it can. What kinds of spectrum-dependent applications will drive data growth in the coming years? What types of connectivity will be needed to serve them? And what do these decision makers need to do to support industry making it all happen? Jameson, I'll turn to you first.
Sure. Okay. Thank you very much, Derek. Thanks, Coop. Thanks, NTIA. And thanks, everyone, for having us. Really appreciate it. So I think that maybe I'll reframe the question just a little bit and focus on what 6G will mean in terms of connectivity for everyone, which is ubiquity. So it's not so much a question of what specific spectrum-dependent applications are going to be required, but how do we ensure that everyone, everywhere, all devices can be connected, not only in urban areas, but in rural, remote, and tribal areas, and then ensuring that spectrum policymaking is directed toward to delivering that ubiquity. So speaking from the satellite perspective, much like the wireless industry has approached it, it's really about a pipeline. Satellite operators require L-band, S-band, C-band for ubiquitous connectivity to devices, whether IoT or whether to consumer devices. We rely on Ku-band and Ka-band to make sure that everyone has access to high-speed and low-latency connectivity, whether that's a consumer, an enterprise, or a government user, particularly first responders. And Ka-band and above is essential to backhaul for all of the devices and the people, the millions of people around America and around the world who need to be connected. Backhaul really is the key to make sure that we can extend these networks from millions to tens of millions to hundreds of millions of people and make sure that America continues to lead the way. So I think we're going to hear a lot about autonomy. We're going to hear a lot about IoT. We're going to hear a lot about consumer broadband, Wi-Fi, industrial IoT. But really the question is not which applications, but where, and ensuring that everyone everywhere has access.
Thank you. Umair?
Thanks, Derek. Good morning, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. It's great to be here. Very, very happy to be on this panel with so many people that I've had the privilege to work with and learn from throughout various points of my career.
Yeah, I don't think it's hot.
It looks like it's on. Is this better?
Yeah, a little closer maybe, yeah.
All right.
Mary, you want to use mine? How's that for sharing?
This feels a little intentional. I don't know. The one mic that's not working. It's great to be here, and it's been such a great morning already. And I just want to say congratulations to NTIA for the symposium and also for the announcement this morning. I think it's hopefully a signal of what the next couple of years are going to be like. Now, in terms of future data drivers, if I've learned anything, it's that predicting the future is really, really hard work. And a lot of very, very smart people get it very, very wrong. And one of my favorite examples appeared on the pages of Popular Mechanics all the way back in 1955. And it suggested that we would have nuclear-powered vacuum cleaners probably have nuclear-powered vacuum cleaners in the next 10 years. And I love this example because of all the things you can do with nuclear power. Someone's mind went straight to vacuum cleaners, but they were self-aware enough to put probably in there. Like, maybe not, but probably. It's a great example. And I say this because, Derek, I want to thank you for giving us this question to embarrass ourselves with. But in all seriousness, I think the best place to start on a question like this is with what we know and extrapolate from there. And I joined CTIA 2 years ago, and I count myself very, very lucky to be able to come here and report on the tremendous progress that the wireless industry has made in upgrading the technological base of the United States. And just this week, actually, we released the latest wireless results for the past year. It's public. It's out there for anyone to look at, to poke at, to embrace, whatever they want to do with it. And the results are tremendous. For the third straight year, the wireless industry experienced 35% growth in the amount of data being carried on wireless spectrum. In fact, this past year, we saw the single largest jump in US wireless history. That was fueled by a historic 32 trillion megabyte increase from the year before. This new data shows that the wireless industry continues to be one of the two biggest investors in the United States, averaging over $30 billion in CapEx every single year over the entire decade. Since 2018, nearly $219 billion have been invested right here at home. And consumers are reaping the benefits. Wireless prices are dropping. Even as inflation is pushing the prices of other consumer goods and services higher, the price for wireless services has dropped. The price for smartphones has fallen nearly 50%. And so why is this important? On one hand, companies usually rejoice when consumers want more of what they're selling. It's a testament to the success of 5G deployment in this country. But on the other hand, there is a real challenge before us. For the past couple of years, American wireless companies have been shouldering this additional activity on their networks with no new spectrum resources to help them do it. And that's because the FCC has not had auction authority, and we've not had a pipeline. The pipeline had run dry in the United States in order to help with all of that. The challenge, that's the challenge we talked about here at the Spectrum Symposium last year. And the good news is that this past year has not just been a year of debate, it's been a year of action. And so we heard Senator Cruz here today. Congress has spoken. It's passed a bill that restored FCC auction authority. The administration has spoken. It has supported the creation of a pipeline of 800 megahertz of spectrum for licensed use. Federal agencies are acting. We heard Administrator Roth announce today new spectrum for auction. So this is a year where we're actually seeing action. We are seeing the United States acting with one voice again, and that's a huge breakthrough for the country, that we are taking another whole of government approach to spectrum policy. It means that we will be stronger economically, it means we will be safer in the long term, and it means we will innovate. And so we're very excited to be here at the symposium and be part of this conversation.
Thank you, Amir. Appreciate it. I'll turn to you, Chris.
I think that's the working one.
You're right. There we go. Sharing continues. Thank you. First of all,
Dynamic sharing.
okay. First of all, thank you very much for having me here today. It's been a pleasure to be here and hear from our esteemed leadership in the communications industry, NTIA, Senator Cruz, and Commissioner Trusty. And a couple of things stood out when I was listening that really kind of took me back to where we were when we were talking about 5G rolling out with, then under the first Trump administration's 5G Fast Plan. And the idea that really kind of got me thinking about that was when Commissioner Trusty talked about this all of the above approach. Your perspective is always informed by where you sit. Broadcom estimates that 99.9% of all internet traffic crosses at least one of our chips. We're aptly named. So we're not just looking at this from a wireless or a wireline or a Wi-Fi or a CBRS. What we're really looking at is what tool is needed to get the data to and from the end user to drive that next generation of use cases. I think the first Trump administration got it right. I think they really propelled forward our spectrum roadmap, and we got to 5G pretty fast. With the 6 gigahertz band, with what they did in the lower C band, I think that there's absolutely more work to do. Then I think about what Administrator Roth said, talking about really promoting the U.S. leadership worldwide, and in particular as it related to the 6 gigahertz band. I've spent more time on a plane over the last 10 years than I have in my own bed. I'm probably averaging 10 to 20 international trips a year, and I can promise you that in international fora, you're competing against Industry Inc. It's the country and then the national champions there, and we really need the U.S. to stand up. And what I've seen recently is awesome U.S. leadership at the WRC. And I think we need a lot more of that. And so I was really heartened to hear that from Administrator Roth. But just taking a step back and then talking about these, just all of the questions that we're going to be discussing today, I sort of have a common refrain. AI, new use cases, uplink, low-band spectrum, we got to get moving, and we need more spectrum for Wi-Fi at the same time. So it's sort of a common refrain. We have been in a world with 3G and 4G driving streaming video. And so if you want to talk about future demand, for the foreseeable future, streaming video is going to be the vast majority of internet traffic. It's going to continue to be that. And you're looking at something that's about 95 to 98% downlink because of that. But we are shifting in the world of AI. So like Umair talking about famous projections and predictions, he at least is talking about popular mechanics. When I think about a prediction that I'm loving right now, it's Iron Man and a Jarvis-like voice assistant. We're not too far away when you look at applications like Alexa and Siri and you see that lag. And you think about how users want to interact with technology, what you're going to need. Broadcom's looking at the KPIs that would be needed to bring about a true Jarvis-like voice experience. Let me tell you, it's not going to happen in uplink limited bands. The uplink is incredibly important. We're going to be moving from a world of traffic where it's 98 or 90-10 to closer to an 80-20. In AI applications, they can be approaching 50-50. I strongly recommend that the NTIA and FCC focused heavily on licensed high-power mobile sub 5 gigahertz. You get wonderful coverage, good propagation, and it's much better on the uplink. So from Broadcom's position, this is an area that a lot of work needs to be done, and we should be working ferociously on that. And I'm not just talking as a Wi-Fi guy. Broadcom has a substantial amount of technology in a 5G base station. I would say that we probably have more silicon in a 5G base station than any other semiconductor manufacturer in the world. So we're really looking at this holistically. So focus on this lower band spectrum for Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi 8 is rolling out very, very soon, and it's going to be for the age of AI. And with Wi-Fi 8, it's going to be designed for uplink, but we're still constrained to 320 megahertz channels. We need a little bit more spectrum so that, maybe Wi-Fi 9 we can get to 640. That's the newsbreaker there. And so Broadcom is heavily focused on 7125 to 7250 to create that fourth 320 megahertz channel and the second 640 megahertz channel. We think with smart spectrum policy, we can get there. We can take this all of the above approach. We can get to 6G fast, and we'll be unleashing new applications that people actually care about. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate it. Dave.
Oh, yeah, I'm good. Yes, my thanks also, Derek and Charles and NTIA for the opportunity to participate. Very happy to be here. I think that pretty much all of the keynote speakers and lead-off speakers mentioned innovation sort of prominently in their remarks, and so CBRS is known colloquially as the innovation band, so I think I'm in the right place. It's clear, to the point that Commissioner Trusty made, it's clear that the nation needs a comprehensive approach to managing our limited airwaves, whether you look at it by federal commercial, terrestrial space, airborne, IMT, or unlicensed or dynamic shared. There are lots of demands and very constrained resources now. The ratios of allocations between these competing uses or various uses should be based on overall long-term value to our country, not on, and actual demand trends, not just on sort of sky is falling forecasts or even short-term government revenue targets. Many, maybe most of these various spectrum communities are forecasting the need for more spectrum. I know, surprise, surprise. So the good news, in my opinion, is that dynamic sharing is proving that it works. And dynamic sharing is one way that we can maximize the utilization of our spectrum, because you can fit multiple uses and services into a single frequency range. Fortunately, the U.S. is the world's leader in dynamic spectrum sharing, based on the success we've had here domestically with CBRS, and then more recently, the exportation of the 6 gigahertz automated frequency coordination sharing mechanisms overseas. And I'd say that's really an example of how we as an industry are really helping to fulfill the White House's goal of promoting American technology leadership abroad, AFC, and how it's going overseas. So CBRS has been a tremendous success. It supports a wide range of services, including mobile, and that would be by traditional mobile operators as well as competitive new entrants. Fixed wireless, a tremendous amount of activity in fixed wireless services, particularly in rural areas. Private wireless, and I'm going to be going a little bit deeper on private as a huge area of innovation and a new market for the country. And then finally, neutral host services, where we can use a CBRS network to provide coverage for mobile operator subscribers within a facility. So those are kind of high-level uses. I would point again, narrowing in on private wireless. CBRS has made the U.S. the world leader in private wireless. And that's just not Dave Wright talking. It's according to reports from the GSA, which is not the U.S. Government Services Administration. It's the Global Mobile Suppliers Association, I believe is the A. So this is an association of all the leading cellular manufacturers, suppliers, handset folks. And according to their reports, CBRS is the most widely used private wireless network or band in the world, and the U.S. is far in front of other countries when it comes to private wireless. So this is great. Prominent examples of private wireless deployments, and I'm going to start saying P5G in place of private wireless just to be a little bit quicker. But some prominent examples would be John Deere, Dow Chemical, the NFL, the U.S. military, Chevron, TSMC Semiconductor, DFW and Miami-Dade International Airports, BMW Automotive, and Ericsson's 5G manufacturing plant in Texas. And those are just a few kind of prominent examples. P5G is a key enabler for Industry 4.0, which in turn is critical to the White House's goal of repatriating manufacturing and industry to our country. So to Derek's question on data drivers, because CBRS has such a wide range of applications, the data drivers that Umer talked about for both mobile and fixed wireless would apply in our CBRS context as well. But there are new data drivers that are being driven specifically by this private 5G deployments, or these deployments. So video. Chris talked about video, and pardon me, video is turning out to be a huge use case in private cellular. And that could be surveillance, monitoring, diagnostics, all of these uses. And as Chris alluded to, as we've seen in other contexts, video generates a huge amount of traffic. But in the case of P5G, I'm actually going to, I'm not disagreeing at all with what Chris said, but we're advancing the paradigm. So in a P5G deployment, what we're typically doing is capturing video, and then we're pushing it to the network. So it's very uplink heavy. I mean, I think you said, we may be moving to an 80-20 downlink uplink, kind of for consumer streaming, I'll say. P5G, it may be the opposite. I mean, we may be looking at cases where we'd like to have 70 or 80% uplink capacity because of the amount of video traffic that's being generated. I'll just give you a couple of examples because I think this kind of speaks to innovation and the innovation that's happening in CBRS and P5G. So Deere, they've deployed CBRS P5G at a 50-acre manufacturing facility. And according to their principal architect, he said, with CBRS 5G radios, anytime we replan the factory, we can light up new zones immediately. Private 5G on CBRS is just how we move data now. It's the default. And that's an example of one of the Industry 4.0 capabilities called industrial mobility. And it's the idea that in the past, in a factory warehouse, manufacturing facility, et cetera, you'd probably have a wired terminal, and people would periodically go to that terminal, enter some data, retrieve data, whatever. But point location, periodic use. Industrial mobility means I'm covering an entire facility with wireless, and I've got staff, robots, AGVs moving throughout that facility, and they can access data whenever they need to, wherever they happen to be. So it's fundamentally changing the nature of data connectivity in an industrial context. And so that's driving new traffic, Derek, to your question. I'll try to be brief here, but NAS Woodby Island, so Naval Air Station Woodby Island, they deployed a flight line of the future. This covers 330 acres and 140,000 square foot of indoor space. Some of the uses they've got for their CBRS P5G, digital engine inspections, remote engineering support, smart refueling operations, connected maintainer devices, and rapid data analytics. On the engine inspection specifically, what they do is they use CBRS connected rapid imaging devices. They take them out to the aircraft on the tarmac, spin up the propellers, capture the video, upload it, do an analysis. Okay, the engine's good to go. Oh wait, that prop needs a little adjustment, whatever. It's reduced the engine inspection times from 4 hours to 15 minutes. And actually, after they deployed it for the reasons I stated earlier, they then realized they could also use the same P5G network to do the security of the flight line itself. So they deployed cameras for surveillance and incursion sensors to make sure people and animals weren't wandering onto the flight line. And they were able to do that at a fifth the cost of physical barriers if they'd had to deploy those. Smart Ag, Derek mentioned that in his opening. There's a ton of stuff going on there. I'm not going to go through all the use cases, but it's kind of cool when you think about like weather monitoring, irrigation management, pesticide optimization. Those sorts of things are all happening with P5G in agriculture. Finally, I've got to talk about my alma mater, which is Duke, so I'm happy about Olivia's jacket, but my other alma mater is the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps has deployed the Department of War's, I'm still getting used to that, Department of War's largest 5G smart warehouse down in Albany, Georgia. And this is a 700,000 square foot facility. Efficiency gains from that deployment include a 2/3 reduction in staffing needs with a 55% reduction in the operational labor costs. The inventory accuracy there increased from less than 70%, which was below their audit threshold, to over 98% with this P5G CBRS network. And the audit savings alone are now paying for the project. Their retrieval and storage times went from a 14-hour baseline to 35 minutes, so that's a 95% reduction. The Navy and Marine Corps examples I like to highlight because they're the ones who made the spectrum available, so it's great that they're benefiting from the new services that have been innovated in the band. But they're very much dual use. So Miami-Dade International is also using CBRS P5G for aircraft inspections and diagnostics, and also using it to monitor the runways there. So those are just a few of the data drivers from CBRS and P5G. In terms of what decision makers need to do, and I'm wrapping up, in terms of what decision makers need to do, first of all, they need to preserve and protect the U.S. leadership in CBRS and P5G. And as the use cases and applications continue to emerge, such as uplink heavy streaming video, they'll need to make more spectrum available. So.
All right, thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. And that's, you know, all the responses here certainly set a broad stage, and maybe the way you finished that, Dave, is actually a good transition into a little more of the specific. Clearly, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the OB3 as we call it, not going to not have a question on that for sure. We touched on it, but maybe, you know, diving a little deeper, do you have, you know, additional sort of recommendations or considerations for NTIA, the FCC, and our agency partners as we begin this implementation? And Umair, maybe I'll start with you on this one, if you don't mind.
Thank you. Well, you know, I didn't want to break any news here today, but CTIA is very happy with the spectrum provisions in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. I will say that. Here's my favorite part about them, is that there's really nothing new or novel in there. It's a return to how we've done spectrum policy in the United States for a very long time. Every time the FCC's auction authority has come up against expiration, Congress has acted in a bipartisan way to renew it. Every time it has renewed it, it has done so with the identification of spectrum for auction. So this is a return to what has worked, to what has been most effective in putting spectrum in the hands of consumers, and to what has catapulted the United States to be a world leader in wireless. So the question now becomes, how do we build on this momentum, and how do we ensure its successful implementation? And I do have a couple thoughts on that. You know, first, I think that, as we heard Senator Cruz say this morning, it is important that at this stage we keep all options on the table. We heard him say that already there are some who are coming in and saying, you know, not me, take this band off the table, take that opportunity off the table, give this incumbent a veto, I think right now it's important that we keep all options on the table as we look at how we are going to hit the targets that have been set in the bill. The second thing, and I think this is really important, is that we have to work on fixing the interagency spectrum decision-making processes in the United States, because let's be honest, for the past couple of years, it has not been producing results for consumers and for businesses. And there's a lot of reasons for that. For one, there's not been trust in that process from the participants, and we need to work on that. For another thing, there's been a lack of discipline among the people who participate in those conversations. It's been mired in bureaucracy. So there's a lot of things that we need to look at to see how can we return that interagency collaboration back to something that's producing actual actionable results. And related to that is my number 3, and I say this one with a lot of love and candor, but we need to revisit spectrum studies and how we're doing them. We've done a lot of spectrum studies where we've experimented now with different ways of looking at what's technically possible inside a spectrum band. And most recently, that's included co-leadership by incumbents who have vested interest in the outcomes of those spectrum studies. We did it after the IIJA. We did it in PATS 1. We did it in PATS 2. We did it in the NSS technical working groups that have come up. We have not had clear guidelines on what co-leadership means. And the truth is, when you say we're both decision makers, what you're really saying is there is no decision maker. And that's what played out in a lot of these spectrum studies. And the question I have is, are we going to do that again? With the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which calls for new spectrum studies in 2.7, in 4 gigahertz, and 7.25 gigahertz, are we going to go back to that model that has yet to produce anything but re-studies? It has yet to produce anything but more studies and not actual actionable results. So I think that's something that we need to revisit as well if we want this bill to be successful this time around. And the last thing I'll say is that we need to go back to what we learned over the past 30 years about market-based spectrum policies and the advantages of it and how effective it is in getting spectrum into the marketplace. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Amir. Appreciate it. Open if anyone else wants to jump in. Chris?
Yeah, thank you very much. So Broadcom essentially sees this as an engineering-based decision. At the end of the day, the vast majority of Broadcom personnel are engineers. And so we're looking at what spectrum is needed to drive the use cases. And so we do think that the administration's focus on 2.7 and on 4 is very important. And it's going to be hard. There's going to be some hard discussions that need to be had, right? But we shouldn't shy away from that. We should be driving forward very, very hard on those bands. We think that that's going to be very, very important for mobile uplink traffic. We continue to think that the 7125 to 7250 needs to be made available for Wi-Fi. We're seeing a massive amount of 6 gigahertz Wi-Fi chipsets being deployed. I estimate that by the end of this year, there'll be over 15 million access points in North America. And then you're probably going to be getting on a rate of doubling that. So huge, billions of, well over 1 billion user devices in the market. So, you go to a stadium now that has a 6 gigahertz access points, and 25 to 30% of the traffic is on that band. And it's because you got 5, 6 generations of Android, a couple of generations of Apple. So we're seeing a lot of success there. So we'd really like to see the NTIA and FCC focus on those bands that are fit for right now, that are needed for the applications today. And we know that some of those discussions are hard, but we think we need to start having those hard discussions. And I think the last thing that I'll say here before I turn it over is taking a look at these glasses right here. I love these Meta Ray-Ban glasses. So I travel all the time, and I was in a meeting discussing AI policy with the Colombian government. My Spanish is lacking, and not a single person in the room spoke English. So I'm in Colombia for this meeting, and I realized this is not a good situation. I put on Zoom, translating my words into into Spanish for them, and they're reading that, and then this is audibly translating what they're saying into English. Fantastic, except that I left the room, and it was still translating from that meeting 15 minutes later. Let's just say that the wireless capabilities that were available in Colombia were lacking, but you can see the direction that we're moving, real-time translation, or these cameras. Whether or not we end up getting AR, like, and I can see something superimposed in my vision, this is an AI assistant. I met so-and-so 3 years ago. How's so-and-so's wife or husband? So you have opt-in technology, which is an instant AI Rolodex. All of that data is going to be uploaded from your glasses, connected to your handset, for local compute, or back to the cloud. You're going to need to have a very, very robust uplink to use that, and we already see people investing in this and this technology being deployed. So low band spectrum for mobile, expand the 6 gig for Wi-Fi. Thanks.
Thank you.
I was just going to add, Derek, I think that as Chairman Cruz and then Commissioner Trustee both sort of alluded to, the legislation was obviously intended to generate auction revenue, so we should be looking to maximize that. So I think as the NTIA and the Commission begin their work, as Commissioner Trustee said, she's expecting a very successful upper C-band auction because there's a large ecosystem that exists there around the world that we can take advantage. Our mobile operators could put it to use quickly. And I think that's a principle that should be applied to these other spectrum bands. Some of them are in or adjacent to very large ecosystems of equipment for IMT mobile equipment. So that should be prioritized. And then obviously you have some big targets that you're trying to meet, both in the short term and over the long term. And I believe, based on history, that the mobile operators will also be most excited about bands where they can get large carriers or channels, as we would say. So, 80 megahertz wide, 100 megahertz wide. So, you should be looking at swaths that would yield those kinds of carriers and where there's an equipment ecosystem.
And I'll just make one point, if that's all right. So we appreciate the work that Congress is doing to open up additional spectrum. Of course, there are many ways to free up spectrum, including by making more intensive use of the spectrum that we have now. That's one of the reasons we really appreciate the work that both the FCC and NTIA have been doing to make more intensive use of low and mid-band spectrum, whether that's through supplemental coverage from space. Chairman Carr's work at opening up now 100 megahertz of mid-band spectrum for direct-to-device capabilities, but also looking at some 25 and 30-year-old rules to ask the hard question of, do these rules really set us up for success in the new space race? So rules like old GSO and GSO sharing that were adopted at the ITU 25 years ago, fixing those could result in an 8x capacity increase with a software fix. So this is spectrum that America has been leaving on the table, that the world has been leaving on the table. And so by taking a hard look at those outdated rules and fixing them, as Chairman Carr has been doing, we can see real benefits for people on the ground. I think one other thing that Umair had mentioned was on sharing between non-federal and federal and coordinating. We've had tremendous success working directly with federal engineers, and I see Jonathan sitting right there from NSF. SpaceX has been working in close partnership with NSF and NRAO on ways to make sure that people within the radio quiet zone can have connectivity without impacting the important science work that's happening at our nation's radio astronomy facilities. And we've been able to do that. And it's been a win-win because on the one hand, we've been able to deliver connectivity in the critical KU band downlink to people within the radio quiet zone who never had any wireless connectivity before. And at the same time, using what we call operational data sharing, and I'm not going to go into it, but you can look at it online. I'd go to the NRAO website where they have all the detail there. But by using this operational data sharing, where we avoid pointing into the bore site of the radio astronomy telescope, they can use additional spectrum within Ka band to do observations that they weren't able to do it before. So this engineer-to-engineer led coordination results in real win-wins. I'd love to see an expansion of that with other federal agencies, and we're starting to see that now, but I think as we look forward into the future, it's not just about opening up new spectrum, which is going to be really critical, but about finding better ways to use the spectrum that we're using today.
Thank you, Jamison. I appreciate that, and I did want to comment that just as we've talked about this U.S. commitment to leadership in 5G, 6G, there's a clear administration priority for the United States to dominate in space as well. So I appreciate that. Maybe, Jameson, you can comment further as well, but maybe for others, picking up a little bit there on these ideas of obstacles to deployment or how we move forward. There's been a real emphasis again in this administration on, taking a fast-paced approach, repealing outdated, obsolete, burdensome regulations or policies. And I'm just wondering if other panelists have comments on what other examples there are for, processes that could be streamlined, eliminated, or ways that we can, work better with industry to move things forward. And it's open to anyone.
I think two things. One, while we're rushing to optimize our processes and take advantage of technology, we need to kind of continue to recognize the people that are working in the administration and core roles. And so first thing I would say is that, Broadcom sees the FCC lab as a national treasure. And so for us, we need to make sure that we continue to fund the technology that we're bringing in there is only going to become more complicated and more difficult to work with. And so we need to make sure that that continues to be resourced appropriately. And then the other thing that we see is you're going to need densification, period. So how are the operators going to roll out efficiently if it's so hard to get rights of way and siting? So I think to the extent possible, we can really continue to move forward in making it easier to deploy to get the coverage that we need. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll jump in on. Is this still not working? Still not working.
Maybe we'll just take this one. This is no longer available.
100%. I just want to add a +1 to everything Chris just said. And the FCC lab's also ITS, NTIA's lab, as well as National Treasure that requires more funding and requires a bigger role, I think, in a lot of the work that we're doing. And absolutely agree that the more streamlining we can do, that makes it easier for service providers and companies to make the investments they need to make in order to build out broadband and bring new innovative services to consumers is welcome change. Certainly we've been working with the FCC on how to streamline infrastructure deployment, and we're hoping to make progress on that as well. I think more broadly speaking as well, looking at one dynamic that we're seeing is that as we are making changes at the federal level, as we're streamlining and rolling back regulations that have stymied deployment or that have inhibited competition at the federal level, what we're seeing is that some states are stepping in and bringing those regulations back. And so we're seeing, for example, states that are dictating the terms and the prices that broadband providers have to provide service within their states. And it is undoing the progress that's being made at the federal level. And so looking at what we can do there to maximize the benefits from this effort to streamline is something else that we're working closely with, not just the FCC, but with other federal agencies as well.
Yeah, I think on the siting point, that's a really critical one, and particularly for satellite operators, although it's a little bit counterintuitive to the way that we think about it, which is for terrestrial networks, often the focus is on densification in urban areas, high-trafficked areas. For satellite operators, what we're trying to do is provide ubiquitous coverage everywhere. Now, providing high-quality, low-latency service everywhere means that we need to put our backhaul as close to the content as possible. But historically, with terrestrial networks, the content and the network is just about in the same place, in and around the urban area. For us to deliver low-latency service to rural areas, we need to put our backhaul in urban areas. And yet rules that were created before the advent of next generation satellite services create barriers to deploying close to urban areas. And what that means is you're creating barriers to lower latency service for people in rural, remote, and tribal areas. Now the Commission's taken steps to modernize those siting restrictions, but I think there's more that we can do. So just to give you one example, today our backhaul uses Ka-band spectrum and E-band spectrum. Now, for a single license, a single antenna, we might face 4, 5, or more different licensing frameworks for one antenna. And receiving a license for a single gateway site can take an average of 1 year or more. Now, the math problem of are you going to cause harmful interference or not to someone who's an incumbent, can you share or not, is an easy physics problem. And we know the answer is yes, everyone can share, and everyone can share in close physical proximity, including within urban and rural areas. And we also know that the propagation characteristics are generally reasonably the same from Ka-band and above. And so the question that we have in terms of modernization and simplification is, to what extent can we leverage successes that the Commission has in its toolkit that have proved successful over time and extend those across a range of frequencies to result in simpler frameworks that are predictable, that ensure efficient use and intensive use of spectrum without causing harmful interference to others for today, but also well into the future. The administration, both NTIA and the National Spectrum Strategy, and also the FCC across a number of proceedings, I think has been paving the path toward that across a wide range of frequency bands. And so, very briefly, the National Spectrum Strategy looked at lower 37 gigahertz, and the NTIA, you can look at the NTIA website, proposed adopting something called the 70-80-90 framework, which is for high E-band spectrum, which is a light licensing framework based on a nationwide non-exclusive license. At WTB, you can get it in one day. You can get the license in one day, and a shared database of deployments where you say, here are my parameters of what I've deployed. It runs a quick math problem, which is just the I over N analysis. If you're good to go, green light, and you can deploy that day. So in one single day, you can get a license compared to 1 year for an Earth station license. So NTIA has proposed this for 37 gigahertz. FCC has proposed to extend its 70-80-90 framework to additional co-primary services. So not just terrestrial use, which is fixed use in the past, but also to satellite use, to aeronautical use, a wide range of users. And the database administrators say, this is totally technically possible. In fact, we know it's technically possible because SpaceX has received about 100-ish licenses for E-band gateways, and we've registered them in the database. They've already done the work. It's already ready to go. Now, the Commission has most recently proposed in its spectrum abundance proceeding, which we strongly support, extending this framework even further to higher band spectrum in W-band. So if you can do it from 37 gigahertz up to W-band spectrum and 110 gigahertz and all these co-primary frequencies, the question is, how scalable is this framework? Could you have one nationwide non-exclusive license for a terrestrial user, for a satellite user, and then allow people to use a database kind of at the Cosine optimal, most transparency, lowest transaction costs, to rapidly deploy based on the physics of these bands? Now, our view is yes. And the question is, what needs to happen to get there? And I think the Commission is already paving a path for it. It's just a question of getting it done. So we look forward to working with everyone on that.
Thank you, Jameson. Dave?
Just briefly on deployment obstacles, I kind of want to loop this back to what Chairman Cruz was saying about the absolute necessity of us beating China / the CCP, in 5G and 6G. And if you look at the deployment stats in China relative to what we're doing here with mobile 5G, it's scary in terms of the numbers, right? So China Mobile alone, according to Inside Towers, has deployed 4.4 million cell sites. And that compares to about, 382K, so 382,000 by the big three here in the US. So that's 11.5 to 1 ratio. If you look at what was deployed or what it was planned to be deployed in 25, so this would be mostly all 5G, a lot of it using mid-band. Again, China Mobile is rolling out 340,000 new cell sites this year. The U.S. Mobile cumulative was, the big three cumulative was about 10,000. So for those of you who don't do higher math like me, that's 34 to 1. So we have a huge density gap and network build-out gap with China. So whatever the obstacles are, we need to solve those. I'd also just say, in the lead up to the OB3A, there was some advocacy about how woefully behind China in mid-band spectrum the U.S. was. It was predicated on some pretty dodgy math, in my opinion, to the point where an industry consulting group called Policy Tracker did their own analysis in May, and they said, essentially it's parity, 831 in China, 790 something here in the US, and that doesn't include FirstNet, so that's 840 in the US. So we're essentially at equal amounts of spectrum. So I would contend we do not have and probably never had a mid-band spectrum gap with China, but we definitely have a density and a build-out gap with China based on the numbers.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I know Amir wants to go. I have to tell folks we are basically out of time, so wrap this into some, Amir's final remarks, and I'll give everyone else just a little bit.
It's a tall order.
To say their last remarks.
Yeah, I'll try to be quick. One dynamic that's always been interesting to me when we talk about China, when we talk about security, when we talk about spectrum, is there's this effort in technology policy almost to approach it with a Maginot Line, right? But if history has taught us anything about those, it's that people just go around them. And I think that this is what U.S. advocacy on 6 gigahertz, why it's hit some roadblocks, why it's hit some challenges. Because there's a couple of things that we've sort of been blind to. One, this narrative that it's been China that's been pushing 6 gigahertz throughout the world. It's turned a blind eye to the fact that it's really been Europe, that France drove a lot of that progress, that there's been a lot of interest in that part of the world in making 6 gigahertz an IMT band, at least the upper portion of it, in making it the launching pad for 6G networks. And really what China did was read the room. If that part of the world is going to 6 gigahertz, then we're going to build devices for 6 gigahertz. And if the United States is going to compete, that's how we should be approaching it as well. We shouldn't be ceding that field. We shouldn't be telling the rest of the world that it's going to 6 gigahertz, if you want to do it, the only supplier you should have is China. We should be creating a market for secure alternatives in the United States, and we do that best by competing. And I think that's something that we have to reframe in the way that we're thinking about the 6 gigahertz debate. Going back to the questions about mid-band parity or not, the fact remains that the rest of the world has a path forward, and the United States does not. Here we allocated the entire 1200 megahertz band contiguous spectrum to 6 gigahertz. And the question is, where do we go in the United States? And if it's not 6 gigahertz, 7 gigahertz puts us at least in the same tuning range. It puts us in the market because there are devices already being developed that straddle the two bands, go from upper 6 into lower 7. And would be an incredible opportunity for the United States to at least get back in the game. Ultimately, just to sort of wrap up and conclude here, we have direction now. We have direction to find spectrum for licensed use. And that's where I think our focus needs to be and our priority needs to be. And I think we need to put all options on the table as we have that discussion.
Thank you. Chris?
Well, that got my competitive juices flowing there, so I think I'm waking up. So first time I would strongly disagree with my friend Umair here. I've never heard of running a race where you're going to then, you're in the lead and you're going to stop and you're going to run backwards so that the other side can catch up. I've never heard of that. We are destroying it globally in deploying product that was only made available 5 years. And in the history of technology, I've never seen something from rulemaking to deployment be so successful in my life. Maybe you guys know something different, but incredibly successful. The only company that's out there doing demos or has any capability is a company that's not allowed to do infrastructure here in the United States. They're the company that has the vast majority of the patents here. So we talk about this, what is this race? The race to 5G, the race to Wi-Fi, it's the race to a capability. And what we'd be doing is hobbling US capability and then arming the people that supposedly we're concerned about by giving them a competitive advantage because they've got the jump on every other telecom manufacturer in the world. So to me, that's sort of sheer crazy. It really is. So at the end of the day, what I'd like to see is I'd like to see policy match technical capability and market reality. The market reality is we've got billions of devices online and coming, and France did what France always does. They're protecting their national champions, their space assets. They were deadly afraid of an IMT identification in 7 gigahertz, and so they said, here, take this. That doesn't mean that they're going to be able to deploy, and it doesn't mean that it's going to give them any type of capability. What they're talking about right now is supplemental downlink or fixed wireless access. So if the administration wants to push fixed wireless access, which is great for connecting people, but as you reach adoption, performance goes to 0, that doesn't make much sense to me. We should be building fiber, laying fiber, going forward with DOCSIS 4.0 and DOCSIS 5.0. So to me, if we're going to have the wireless networks of the future, we need to invest in the wired networks of today so that we have the capacity to do that. And if we're going to be driving services, we need to make sure that we have base stations that are deployed everywhere using the right spectrum. But now and always, Wi-Fi is going to be the workhorse indoor. It's got the attach rate of every device. You'd have no smart home devices if it were just 5G. All of these operators have stores. They could be 5G TV. How many 5G TVs have you seen? 5G set-top boxes. At the end of the day, there needs to be wireless spectrum to drive the innovation that we're working on. The FCC got it right. I'm sorry that other countries get it wrong. At the end of the day, there's going to be a scorecard, and we're going to see what sort of manufacturing EADS has versus Boeing. Are they going to have the same technical capability for robotics or not? I mean, at the end of the day, there's going to be a scorecard.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
And Derek, if I could say one thing, man, oh man, we should have started with this question. I think this. I really appreciate Chris's comments, and I appreciate your focus on the international aspect. American space dominance, the new space race, is fundamentally an away game. SpaceX, over the course of the last 5 years, has expanded now to 150 markets around the world, serving millions of people. As direct-to-device capabilities deploy, the consumer out in the middle of the ocean, out in the middle of the hinterlands, is either going to connect to a US satellite operator with their cell phone, or a Chinese satellite operator with their cell phone, maybe a European operator with their cell phone. And so the United States needs to make sure that as it's making its spectrum policy decisions, particularly in direct-to-device spectrum, low and mid-band spectrum, that it's considering the implications of domestic policy making on the international ability of American satellite operators to compete, because that's going to be truly essential to American space leadership in the future, and 6G, which ultimately is going to be about ubiquity. One final thing that I want to say about fiber is, look, our gateways rely on fiber connectivity in order to connect to the internet and backhaul user traffic. But many rural base stations, many rural local networks, enterprises, and consumers rely on wireless backhaul from satellite operators. And so SpaceX is increasingly serving rural, remote, and tribal communities in order to make sure that all of those communities are connected, whether it's the Wi-Fi router in their home, whether it's the base station connecting the local community, or whether it's the enterprise device connecting the school or the enterprise. All of those are going to be backhauled through satellite capabilities, and that means having robust satellite backhaul, particularly in millimeter wave spectrum and Ka band and above. Thanks.
Thank you. And Dave, last word.
We should all agree to continue this in a different fora, because there's a bunch of stuff we didn't get to, right? You're going to talk about government commercial collaboration, which I'd certainly love to go through all of the things that we've learned in CBRS from that. And I thought Jamison's point earlier about engineer to engineer, collaboration is key. I think Nick's in the back of the room, and he's a poster child for that. So is CBRS. In terms of final closing thought, and I'll try to give one to Chris here at the same time, or score a point for him, if you will. We need certainty. We need certainty in 6 gigahertz. We need certainty in CBRS. That's what will continue to result in investment in P5G and unlicensed and all of these things. So I strongly agree with the 17 majority members of the House Energy Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, who recently sent a letter to Chairman Carr urging that as the Commission and NTIA begin their work to fulfill the OB3A spectrum provisions, they should, quote, make every effort to avoid disrupting or displacing these commercial services, and those commercial services being CBRS and 6 gigahertz unlicensed. So I could not agree more strongly with those members. Thank you.
Thank you. And I want to thank the panelists, and I think we could go on forever, but alas, we're out of time. So join me in thanking them.
Thanks, Dave. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Derek, and all the panelists there. And that's the one that doesn't work. That's the busted mic. Okay, calling an engineer to fix it. All right, we're going to kind of very quickly move into the second panel. This is the government panel. So appreciate everyone's coming out today. Sorry, there is just standing room only in this room, but I think that points to the importance of spectrum policy in this country, and hearing how we're going to proceed with that. So I think we're ready for our second panel here, we'll turn to Adam Cassidy, NTIA's Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary and Deputy Administrator, to moderate our final panel for today. The panel will feature several high-ranking officials from federal agencies which have the responsibility to implement the OB3 Act while keeping their eye on their own missions. In addition to the domestic implementation of the Act, the agencies are now preparing for the next World Radio Conference, the WRC, to be held in 27. And that'll be a host of agenda items, and I'm sure as the years progress toward 27, you'll be hearing a lot more about that. So our federal agency partners have a lot of work cut out for them. So Adam, turn the mic over to you. And if the panelists could come up as well. Thank you, please. Great.
Thanks, Coop. Has anyone given a round of applause to Coop today? He needs it. He does. I mean, just for putting up with me alone, frankly. And he's laughing, but inside he's not. Coop, thank you for everything that you do. We sincerely appreciate your work. So thanks everyone for swinging by to NTIA's Spectrum Symposium. I'm told it's the 8th one? The 8th? The 8th? 7th, okay. It's been great to see you all here today. I am charged with moderating a panel of our illustrious guests who are all smarter and better looking than I am, and I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into some questions. So without further ado, why don't I just start right here at my left.
All right. I'm Irene Parker. I am the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Satellites at NOAA, and I'm also performing the duties of the Assistant Administrator. So basically all the weather and space weather satellites, we build it and we operate them, and Spectrum is very key in our world of protecting lives and property at NOAA. So I'm looking forward to this panel.
Hi, I'm Arpan Sura. I'm at the FCC. I work for FCC Chairman Carr, and I am a Senior Counsel for Space, Satellite, and Technology.
Good morning. My name is Scott McLaughlin. I'm a Colonel in the U.S. Air Force. I am currently supporting the Department of War with Ms. Arrington, who's the CIO, as well as Ms. Vernita Harris, who's the Director of Spectrum.
Hi, good morning. I'm Liam McKenna. I'm the Chief Counsel at the FAA. And I recently came from the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee. I mentioned that because I think you heard from Senator Cruz and my old colleague Ariel this morning. Excited to talk with you this morning. FAA is, of course, one of the largest occupants of the federal occupants of Spectrum, probably second only to the Department of War.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for showing up today. We'll just jump right into it. So. Obviously, we've recently passed OB3, in which it was charged that we will identify 800 megahertz of spectrum, 500 from the feds and 300 from FCC and other commercial users. We're thinking through what those band studies ought to be and where they should look. So from our panelist perspective, when we think about bands that we're excited to look at that might be harder, easier, more available now versus later, sort of where are our heads at in terms of where we're going to go out and get this 800 megahertz?
All right, I'll give it a go. From the NOAA side, I will say the areas that we're very comfortable with is in the 7 gigahertz arena. With the satellite uplinks, we think that we could probably work with industry to ensure that we can still protect our NOAA mission satellites from terrestrial weather and space weather, working with commercial industry and making sure the appropriate conditions are put on those types of licenses. But we really do believe that we can definitely work with industry and come up with a good way and a good con-ops to share that arena.
So the FCC has to hit 300 megahertz. 100 megahertz has to come from Upper C for the auction by July of 27, and then the rest has to come by September of 34. So we're laser focused on Upper C right now. This is our first, our best, and potentially our only shot to get a large amount of mid-band spectrum into the market by the end of this administration. So it's a very important priority for us. The statute has put into place very aggressive timelines. We have to begin, finish a rulemaking, and conduct an auction all within 2 years. We're under the gun, and we have to be in lockstep coordination with our friends over at the FAA. The good news is we've done this before in the first C-band proceeding. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's lots of things that we've learned that worked, and there's lots of things that we've learned can change. And we're working to bake that into our processes. Better coordination with our friends over at the FAA, and we're very optimistic about getting this done, and look forward to sharing more updates.
Great.
So maintaining the Department of War spectrum access is absolutely essential to some of our homeland defense missions. And so we're having to take quite a bit of time to study some of this and evaluate what we can share and what we can vacate. And so we're in full support of the President's economic goals and initiatives. We just need a little bit of time and resources in order to be able to conduct these studies. But as my colleague here just mentioned, this is a very good target of opportunity that we have to support some of these economic goals to help our economic vitality for our national security. And so with that said, we have looked at some of the lower 7 part that we can probably vacate, as well as some other areas. But we're currently in coordination with interagency partners to make sure we hit these goals and milestones.
Thanks. Well, from FAA, and actually, if I could take a point of personal privilege, since I used to work for Ariel, I want to congratulate her on her confirmation, but also acknowledge your, Adam, Brooks' work holding down the fort while you were waiting for Ariel to get confirmed. So I think you all have done an excellent job, because there have been a lot of interagency discussions about this very subject, because this is top priority for the administration. That's why we see it so strongly reflected in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. For us, as Arpan alluded to, Upper C is one of the top. We are also laser focused on Upper C. I like the way you put that, because that has a lot of implications. And any of these bands are going to take considerable coordination and planning to get it right. And that is why I'm so happy that we are way ahead of the game in terms of planning, or at least on time on the game, in terms of planning and coordination with industry, with the wireless industry, with the air carriers, with the radio altimeter manufacturers, and within the government itself. And that's why we all know each other quite well already. Beyond Upper C, I think on our radar, at least worth looking at, is also the 2.7 to 2.9 gigahertz range. And
Did you mean on your radar, literally?
Glad you picked up on the pun. So as Adam's alluding to, our principal occupant at FAA in the 2.7 to 2.9 is our airport surveillance radar systems, which are slated to be replaced under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. There are some other occupants. The next radar systems are in there, and the Department of War also has some radar systems in there that are very similar to ours. That's why I say study, because that's another one that I think is at least worth looking at.
Great. Well, thank you for all of that, and obviously NTIA has its own perspective on identification of federal bands, and we're moving forward expeditiously to execute on the presidential directives. So let's talk about spectrum sharing. Okay, so and obviously I think you're all going to have different perspectives, and I think when we say spectrum sharing, it can mean a lot of different things, right? It can mean geographic division, it can mean sort of time division, it can mean sort of disparate power levels, and sort of where we identify who can operate what and sort of in which use case. Nevertheless, there has been some discussion of spectrum sharing and what that future looks like, and to the extent that you guys have a perspective on prior models of spectrum sharing, future models of spectrum sharing, and so on, would love to hear your own perspectives.
All right. Well, from the NOAA perspective, I will say that we have been actively sharing our spectrum as a part of the AWS-3 and METSAT downlinks between us and commercial industry. And I will say What we have learned is active collaboration and communication has been very key to being able to share the spectrum, especially in understanding what the impacts would be from a public safety perspective has been really key. I think both sides educating each other on what they are doing in each of those bands has been very important. I think there was a lot of perspective that, NOAA is just a pure science agency, and it was forgotten that we are a public life and safety organization, especially from our satellite perspective, and having those types of dialogues and setting up the technical architecture to be able to ensure that if we do see interference, we can have those conversations effectively and make sure that our public lives and safety systems are not impacted. I think that's been really great. I think with the additional sales that would happen as a part of the big beautiful bill, I think it's important that we continue that type of collaboration. I cannot stress the word collaboration enough. I am not a lawyer, but I will tell you from an engineering perspective, there are many things that we can do, but there's also things from a physics perspective we cannot do. So having that type of educated dialogue will be very important for this, for the future sales of other spectrum bands.
When people talk about sharing, they think about technologically enforced managed access systems like the SAS or the AFC or even dynamic spectrum sharing. But sharing, as you pointed out, Adam, is really just another way of talking about deconfliction. And while the bill talks about full power commercial license use cases, that doesn't eliminate the need to deconflict by time, by geography, by spectrum, using all the tried and true methods that we've always had. And IRAC is a critical component of that deconfliction process. At the same time, it's important to recognize that exclusive use is a form of deconfliction, and it is often the best form of deconfliction because it offers clear rights and full flexibility, and it stimulates full investment in the band. And so all forms of deconfliction have to be on the table, and the mention of full power exclusive use license cases in the bill doesn't change that.
So because the department's such a heavy user in the spectrum arena, we're very focused on this effort to find ways to share. And we're really looking at the dynamic spectrum sharing that was just mentioned, as well as the other measures that we've seen in the past that have been successful. But how can we have our advanced spectrum coexistence demonstration we have coming up be as successful as possible? And how can we continue with that critical investment to find that next generational leap into potential sharing in the future? And that's really where a lot of our efforts been focused, because we are such a heavy user and because we have a significant chunk. And so trying to maintain some of our access as well as share is really where our mindset's at.
I think if we're talking about active spectrum management, it has some potential. ARPAN referenced SAS and AFC, and those are technologies that in my mind have some potential here. But we also have to keep in mind some of the past attempts at spectrum sharing and how those have worked. I'm thinking in terms of DFS and 5 gigahertz and the effect on our terminal Doppler weather radars. Because the fact is the technologies that are in the band all have to be able to cooperate at equal levels, and they'll have to recognize the signals equally. So our terminal Doppler weather radars are very sensitive. They're designed to detect raindrops, and so they detect Wi-Fi signals a long ways away, a lot further away than the Wi-Fi routers are going to detect that our radar systems are operating. So you probably hear me use the word coordinate and plan a lot in this panel, and I think this, like all of these, is going to really require extensive coordination and planning and analysis to make sure that if we do use some sort of active spectrum sharing, that it achieves all of our goals.
So speaking of coordination and planning, we've got WRC 27 coming up. As we all know, WRC 27 is happening in China. And that represents a variety of challenges for the United States. Obviously, we're going to go and kick ass, but it's going to be difficult, right? It's going to be a challenge, and I think it goes almost without saying, but we'll say it anyway, that the United States government will have to sort of speak with one voice and make sure that we are all sort of tightly knit together if we are going to go and achieve a successful outcome, which of course we will. So turning over to the panel, and maybe we'll start with Liam and go and pull this way this time. What opportunities do you see for U.S. participation at Work 27? Working with allies and partners. How are we going to make sure that the voice of the United States is represented in the future of international spectrum management and harmonization?
Yeah, I mean, I think these kinds of discussions and the discussions we have internally are the way we coordinate on that. But I agree wholeheartedly that we need to be in coordination when we walk into the room. But also, the purpose of these discussions at the WRC is to ensure that globally we are coordinated on these things. So when we talk about spectrum sharing, we need to make sure that we are all globally coordinated on what spectrum sharing models are we using, because it doesn't work unless we're all playing by the same rules, at least in a given band. Top of priority for us, of course, at FAA is going to be protecting strategic incumbent bands. Obviously, the radio altimeters we've talked about, lower C, which operate in 4.2 to 4.4, and one of the discussions under, I think, agenda item 1.7 is 4.4 and above, and we need to make sure that same way that we're deconflicting wireless use of the lower C with radio altimeters, we're thinking about it in the above the radio altimeters band as well. I think the other one that I'll mention is just global harmonization of 6G bands and standards, including what constitutes interference and spurious emissions that are at acceptable levels. Again, we need to all be playing by the same rules, or this isn't going to work very well.
Makes sense.
So the conference only occurs every 4 years, and so we have a little bit of time to plan since it's in 27. And decisions from these conferences impact short and long-term goals. And it's important to note that about 80% of these topics that are up for the WRC 27 are space and mobile related. And so early and often coordination is the key. And coordination, as we've heard repeated numerous times, is going to be what we're going to have to do as a country and with our allies in order to make sure that our equities are captured and that we are not caught off guard or in the wrong spot when it comes to how our adversaries, such as China, is trying to position themselves. And so those early coordination and making sure that we all come to the table and understand our equities is going to be key when we're going to this WRC 27.
There are 4 issues that the U.S. government has to solve for when it comes to Work 27. The first is personnel, identifying a lead team early and with the level of competence and sophistication we need to prevail. The second is place. This is going to be in Shanghai, and we have to have operational readiness to represent the U.S. government well in a secure way. The third is policy. As just mentioned, majority of the items that are up for resolution are satellite items, and it's no secret that China seeks to dominate space. We're currently tops, but they've made it a national priority to overtake us, and they use forums like work to execute their geopolitical dominance strategy. And then the final is partnership. We have to offer a compelling alternative to the Chinese model of censorship and control. We need to shore up our allies and articulate a vision for a free outer space. And that's going to be a lot of behind-the-scenes work, bread and butter diplomacy. But fortunately, I'm heartened to see that this has been a priority of the White House, of a lot of people in this room, of industry. I think people get it, and you're starting to see forces mobilize into action. So, I remain vigilant but optimistic.
I would say from the NOAA perspective, we are a global partnership with our allies like the Europeans and the Japanese. And so weather is not just a U.S. phenomenon, it's a global phenomenon. So protecting and educating people on protecting the passive bands from a satellite perspective will be extremely important to have that one voice with the United States and our allies at WRC. As that will help us ensure that we can protect the appropriate observations that are used for hurricane predictions, what Liam had stated of protections from the radar perspective for our next RADs and our future radar next. So having that perspective of a balance between public safety globally and improving the partnerships with our commercial industries will be really key to have that clear one voice, both from the federal and industry perspective as we attend WRC.
Thank you for that, Irene. And that's actually, I think, a good segue into the next piece around growing federal missions and partnerships. So, as we identify more spectrum to bring online commercially, there is, of course, a cost, and there is a cost to our federal partners. But on the other hand, maybe there is an opportunity in that when we free up commercial spectrum, we make it more possible for our friends in the interagency and across the federal government to partner with commercial providers. I had the good fortune over the last week of going to Denver and Los Angeles and meeting with, I think, 13 space startups, most of which are operating in exclusively federal bands, SNX, and like some, in KU. But suffice it to say, right, they are being relied upon by folks in defense and others to partner very, very tightly with the United States government, and I think in some ways represent a new paradigm of federal usage of commercial assets. So with that in mind, when we think about growing federal capabilities, where are our heads at in terms of how building our own systems versus partnering or buying with others? And maybe we can start with Colonel McLaughlin for that one.
So Department of War supports this sharing you mentioned, increase the commercial spectrum access while also safeguarding the military spectrum use. And so just as each proposal comes forward, we need to make sure that we're evaluating these to see what kind of risk to mission we have and to our defense. But we're seeking these ways to be more efficient with the access we use with our advanced spectrum coexistence demonstration and things of that nature to be as efficient and effective as far as the spectrum that we have and how we can potentially share with our federal and industrial partners.
Irene, maybe you want to take the next one?
Yeah, I could actually echo exactly what the Colonel just stated, and I would put public life and safety in that perspective. I would say that, but one of the things that we are definitely willing to do on NOAA is that we're committed on doing the assessments with industry. So I think that's one of the key things is that we do not want to do these assessments in our own vacuum. We want to work with industry as we do these assessments as a partnership so we can both understand what the flexibilities may be in sharing or even the federal government leaving that band. And so I think that will be really important. I think that will be really important for NOAA as we plan our Radar Next program, which is the follow-on to NextRad. We're in the initial phases of our requirements process for that, and we are committed to working with industry and NTIA and doing these types of engineering assessments and figuring out what the best design is for our future Radar Next to ensure that we can balance the needs of commercial industry and balance the needs of the federal government for saving lives and property.
So I think from FAA's perspective, I'll use kind of upper C as an example, and I think President Trump is right. We need to clear out some access and space for the wireless community to use and innovate with more spectrum. Otherwise, we're going to get other countries are going to leap ahead of us. And doing that safely and smartly, of course, that's all about the planning and coordination. But I'm heartened when we look at upper C with the level of coordination that I'm seeing, with FCC, with NTIA within the government, but also between the wireless manufacturer, the wireless operators, and the air carriers, and the RADAL manufacturers. I think we are seeing it looks very different than it looked when we were talking about lower C a few years ago, and I think that's a good sign as we look to adopt new technologies, whether it's new radio altimeter technology or new airport surveillance radar systems. These technologies, if we plan appropriately, are going to be able to operate in a narrower amount of spectrum, and that frees up the spectrum that these innovators in the United States need to come up with these new technologies like 6G.
Arpin, anything?
Nothing to add to their description of the federal missions. I guess I would offer a passing comment that when we're thinking about federal and non-federal, the question of incentives is always top of mind, and are we solving for the right incentives? And I think that should just be kept, first and foremost.
Yep. Well, sort of double clicking on commercial space, not just in its federal dimensions, but in its purely commercial dimensions, or frankly, dual use. Folks are well, let's put it this way. Our space licensing regime was built for a different era, like high, sparse, heavy state actors launching satellites largely into GEO, and things are really different now. The area of focus is very different. Satellites are getting both larger if you go to K2 and much, much smaller if you're looking at these little CubeSats or LEOs. Things are evolving, and we're having all of these novel use cases in space, and orbit raising and lowering, and imaging of sort of non-Earth assets, and what does that look like, and so on. So as commercial space plows ahead, what do we do about it as the United States government to make sure that we are accommodating all of the new and cool things that folks are doing in this very country? I'll start with Arpin.
I saw an interesting stat the other day, and I don't know if it was real or just AI-generated slop, but it essentially said there's been more payload launched over the last 7 years of spaceflight than there has been in the first 61. And if that stat's not true, I nevertheless choose to believe it because we see it borne out in the FCC's own data. It's a hockey stick of license applications, modifications, STAs, paper. And our system was not designed to scale for that volume. And so what we're doing here, what we've been doing since January is we've been focusing on 4 key principles. The first is speed. We want to cut our application backlogs. We don't want there to be any backlogs. We want there to be predictability, because predictability is what markets need to facilitate capital investment, and there's a lot of it going around in the space industry. So we want to have speed and then simplicity. Only ask for the information that you need. Don't fly spec information that you don't. And as we've done a top-to-bottom review, we're finding that we're looking at things that are sort of obsolete in light of modern technology. We're finding rules like EPFD potentially that have existed way before the modern space age and need to have a fresh look. The third thing is security. I mentioned China's seeking to dominate in space, and so that's both a function of our ownership rules, both a function of our WRC posture, but then also making sure that America is the place to flag, America is the place to win. And then finally, satellite spectrum abundance. You're seeing it with more MSS coming online. You're seeing it in our an abundance proceeding where we're looking at 20,000 megahertz of spectrum across 4 very different bands. We're very excited about what we're doing on that front, and the space economy deserves it. It's growing, and we want to make sure that we're there to help unleash it.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Sure, I'll jump in. United States, we're the undisputed leader in commercial space right now, and I think we'd all want it to stay that way. And so fundamentally, that's kind of when we're talking about this at FAA, or even when you look at the President's executive order on commercial space, that's what it's all about. It's how do we ensure that the United States remains at the forefront, whether we're talking about spaceport infrastructure, we're talking about eliminating unnecessary duplicative regulatory requirements within agencies, between agencies, looking at how we can streamline environmental permitting with better CADXs, with better programmatic reviews, with more dynamic environmental assessments, and making sure that we can accommodate a dramatically increased cadence of commercial space launches, while also ensuring that we are enabling access or continuing to enable access for the existing occupants of the National Airspace System, not displacing the commercial carriers, but also allowing for eVTOLs and drones and other new entrants into the space. I think to your point, talking about 7 years, I don't know if that statistic is correct, but I can tell you that we reached a record of commercial space launches, at least within FAA, for us in June of 21 launches in 1 month. And that's pretty remarkable. We, in the past had been talking, just a couple years ago, we're talking about 3 to 4 launches a month, and now we're talking about more than that per week. And I think we can go significantly orders of magnitude beyond that. We just have to make sure, again, that we're coordinating and planning to make sure that we are doing so in a way that reflects the needs of the existing occupants of the National Airspace System, acknowledges and ensures we're protecting against safety implications of mishaps, and that we are also considering all of the foreign, basically our neighbors and their interests.
Absolutely.
I really don't have too much to add to that, except that Department of War is absolutely in support of that executive order to enable competition in the commercial space industry. And it's a benefit to our country as well as to the Department of War. And so trying to make sure we do as much as we can to support it is exactly what we're trying to do at this time. It could only do more benefit to the Department of War as well as to our overall national security and economic growth.
Yeah, I agree with that. From the NOAA perspective, we are committed to growing our commercial space database, and that means they need to be able to have readily available access to space. So we are committed in buying everything from microwave sounding to GNSRO data to help with our observation capabilities. So companies like Spire, Planet IQ, Tomorrow.io, all these new companies that are joining the fleet in space, it's really key for them to be able to have access to that because it will help from a NOAA perspective, lives and property for the models. The more observations we have in weather, the better our models will be, the better that we'll be able to do those predictions. So getting them access to space is extremely important, and NOAA's committed that when they do get access to space, we are very much interested in procuring that type of data products.
Well, that's all very exciting to hear, and it's going to be an ongoing challenge, and certainly more to come in this arena. But I think, as you can see, everyone's sort of singing from the same sheet of music in terms of, where we want to go in commercial space. So, speaking of space, but also non-space, let's wrap this up with a final question on PNT. There are a lot of really cool technologies. In PNT, position, navigation, and timing. Some are spectral, some are non-spectral, like some is about synchronization of quantum clocks and things like that. There's one company that will do a dead reckoning if you start in your car and drive like a couple of turns. They can tell from sort of variations in the height of the surface of the Earth, putting that against their previously existing maps, and they can sort of tell where you are. They don't need to reference anything at all. There are technologies that can detect, using just the magnetometer in your phone, variations in Earth's magnetic field to get a good sense to within a meter where you are. Really cool stuff. But of course there are also, just RF technologies, and they can be terrestrial or space-based. So FCC is looking at this right now, and Arpan, I wonder if you can kick us off, just thinking through what you're excited about in PNT, and maybe you can even preview for us where the commission might be going.
So yeah, this is a great topic. Two things are indisputably true. Number one, everybody agrees GPS is vital to our economy and national security, full stop. Number two, we need an alternative or a complement to our existing system. Again, everyone agrees, full stop. And it's reinforced by the fact that Russia and China are developing their own alternative or complements to GPS. And that's why one of Chairman Carr's first items was to do this notice of inquiry where we sought broad comment on the state of the art, different technological configurations and architectures, whether it be LEO broadband, terrestrial, broadcast, over the top, pulse, other things. And it's really kickstarted a healthy conversation. And, I've been pleased, and my team has heard from folks all over town, and they bring various perspectives, and there are companies in stealth that came and showed me their technology, and it was really cool. One thing that we teed up in our NOI, which is becoming apparent, is that, all of these solutions have trade-offs between coverage and UE compatibility, spectrum resources, resiliency, performance, and the economic business case. And, as I see it looks like there's a lot of frothy investment. The markets are working towards a solution space. And, typically, we want the market to work that out. And I think it's a question about like what we need to do as a government to help spur that along, or whether there is no market failure and we should just let those forces play out.
Anyone else?
Sure. So the department is working closely with the interagency partners at the PNT Executive Committee to identify what solutions are out there and what's available. But to echo the comments, GPS is absolutely the cornerstone that we use for PNT. And that's also a vulnerability. Like putting all of our eggs in that one basket, it means that we need to start spreading it out because our adversary knows it, and trying to find as many different solutions out there as possible in order to guarantee our PNT at any given time around the globe is absolutely critical to what we do in the department.
Sure, I'll add a comment. I mean, we have a whole office dedicated to PNT that co-chairs the XCOM with the Department of War in DOT, but that's not within FAA, so I don't want to speak for them. And they're the experts on this. But I can tell you that from an aviation perspective, we're very aware of GNSS denial right now. It is becoming increasingly common to see jamming, to see spoofing, and both are problematic, and it's even more problematic because the signals from the GPS satellites are so weak that it's actually pretty trivial to jam them. So I know that they are actively working on complementary PNT technology, and look forward to seeing what they come up with.
Anything? Or?
All I can say is we depend on it and need the accuracy, so we're open to any opportunities. If there are different technologies, we're happy to take a look at it, but precision is very, very key for weather satellites and ships and drones and everything else that we do.
100%. And I imagine that the solution that ultimately emerges will not just be belt, but it'll be belt and suspenders and river waders and everything else that we can imagine. I gather is going to be deployed. Well, if we could all just give a round of applause to everyone who participated today. Thank you so much. And I am going to turn it back over to the illustrious Charles Cooper to, I guess, close us out here. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Adam, and the panelists, and that actually concludes our Spectrum, our 7th annual Spectrum Symposium. Hard to believe it's been that many. I think we started off with the late breaking news from Assistant Secretary Ariel Roth on NTIA is already getting a jump start on some identifying some spectrum in the L-band. Already off to a great start. Have a lot more to go to, but it's always good to have a win on the chart there. And plus with the other comments as well from Senator Cruz, especially I appreciated kind of the inside baseball that transpired there to come up with the big beautiful bill and the spectrum provision, and also all the great comments from the panelists, and I love the enthusiasm from Adam as well. So thank you everyone for coming today. Thank you. Yeah. Also, before I go, I would have to just say kudos to the Office of Spectrum Management staff. who pulled this together in 45 days. You're right when Ariel came in, so that was a quick, and particularly John Alden and Antonio Richardson. If we can give them a round of applause. Have a great day, everyone.